Mental health has always been a taboo subject. If you had a fracture or if you cut your hand and were in physical pain, you would immediately go to the doctor and get it checked. But somehow, if you were in any kind of mental or emotional trauma, you feel ashamed to go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist to get it checked out. Although, with growing awareness, this seems to be changing. Today, we are joined by eminent psychiatrist Dr. Kersi Chawda, who has taken time out for us to answer all of the questions that you have written in. He was the past president of the Bombay Psychiatry Association, and he has headed various task forces for the Indian Psychiatry Society related to school and college health. This is what he has to say.
It up with sadness. All of us are sad occasionally when things don't go our way, when we have a breakup, when the boss shouts at us, when we don't have enough money, when we don't feel well, we just feel sad. But sadness just goes away. It doesn't really come in the way of our day-to-day functioning over a period of time. When we are talking of depression, we are talking about sadness being one of the symptoms of depression. But as a general rule, when we talk about major depressive disorder, which is an extremely important and the commonest psychological disorder that we can think about, we're talking about a situation where there is a constant impairment of the person's occupational, social, physical life. He finds it very difficult to function. And amongst other things, you have a whole bunch of symptoms which have to last for a period of at least 2 weeks and which are severe enough to impair his day-to-day functioning. So in such a situation, when we're talking about depression, we talk about sadness, we talk about crying, we talk about a low mood, a demotivation, a feeling that life is very bad. Often there is either too much sleep or too little sleep, too much eating or too little eating. There's a reduced proclivity towards sexual activity. There's just a general feeling of lassitude, lethargy. Sometimes people come and say, it's so difficult to get out of bed. I manage to pull myself to the bathroom and then I go back to bed because I just can't face up to the world. Probably the most important aspect of depression is the fact that there's a whole bunch of people who then start thinking very negatively, especially if it's not being treated, and then they start thinking about suicide, which becomes first an idea and then an action. So when we are talking about depression, we are talking about a basic and a very major psychological disorder, unlike sadness, which is just a temporary thing. Anxiety. To the layperson, anxiety means a kind of a ghabrahat. It's a kind of nervousness, tension, what is going to happen, how am I going to cope. It's what we call a feeling of impending doom, that something bad is going to happen. Now, there are various ways of looking at anxiety. There's something where there's a borderline kind of anxiety all the time, where you're constantly nervous, tense, anxious, you start thinking the worst, you think something bad is going to happen. Very often you run to the toilet, you sleep too little because of the stress. Sometimes there is compensatory eating, sometimes you just can't sleep, you feel nauseous, you get a headache, you start palpitating, your hands start trembling, you get into a cold sweat, and people might even rush you to the hospital thinking you're going to get a heart attack. But that's not a heart attack, it's just generalized anxiety, which in an acute situation is what we'd call a panic attack. And that's when you land up in the hospital. The doctors will check you out and say there's nothing wrong with your heart, but go and see a psychiatrist because there's something happening in the brain which is causing so much of stress. So when I might be stressed because of exams, I might be stressed because I have a fight with my wife, I might be stressed because there's a financial issue, I might be stressed because there's a death or a divorce in the family. Obviously, if it's affecting you enough that it's getting in the way of your normal occupational, physical, social life, if you're constantly crying, if you're constantly very, very angry, if you feel people are looking at you, talking to you, there are voices in your ears, there are things that you see and you talk to people about it and they don't know what you're talking about. If you feel that messages are being transmitted through the billboards or through television, if you feel that there is just too much of hyperactivity in you, you can't sleep, you can't eat, you can't concentrate, you're constantly depressed, you're constantly very negative about things, it's constant palpitation, your hands are shaking, you feel suicidal, these are certainly situations where you should look at attempting to see a mental health professional and dealing with it the way it needs to be dealt with. When we talk about suicide, when I was a medical student, we'd say that, you don't even think of suicide till you're about 20, 21. Today, we are finding kids as young as 11, 12, 13 attempting or actually committing suicide. We used to say that a person who talks about suicide is never going to do it, so it's barking dogs don't bite. But this is actually one situation where barking dogs will bite. That as much as 80% of people who have attempted suicide have talked about killing themselves more than 4 or 5 times in the preceding 4 or 5 months and have not been taken seriously. So please take it very seriously. There are a huge number of causes for suicide. You can be suicide. The commonest cause is depression. So if you are depressed, seek help, because we don't want you to be another statistic. You need to be aware of the fact that it's not a sign of weakness if you go and see a mental health professional, either therapy or medication or both. It is essential that the depression comes under control so that a possible suicidal attempt is negated. Social media is here to stay. We are never going to be managing without that. But unfortunately, it causes a whole bunch of problems. The commonest problem, of course, is related to the fact that people spend too much of time on social media. They don't really go out and do physical stuff. Kids don't go out and play. They don't go out at all. They're just stuck on their phone, which can be horrible and which certainly cannot be a good situation to be in. But more important than that probably is this whole thing of trolling, which is a new phenomenon, body shaming, which is terrible, and cyberbullying, which is horrendous and which can cause a whole bunch of repercussions on the child or on the adult. We have to remember that these things become viral so easily that you just put anything and it can just be moved from one to another to a third, and in geometric, logarithmic progression, it just reaches the entire universe. So a person who might be having problems already with his or her self-esteem is shamed into being told that he or she is ugly or can do nothing with life. We keep reading about people that are actually attempting suicide because of the way they've been shamed, which is a terrible indictment of the society we are living in. We are also looking at the constant fear of missing out, which everybody talks about, FOMO, which is becoming a very major issue today. I mean, if you're on Facebook or Instagram and you're seeing all your friends seeming to have a horrendously lovely time while you're stuck in a rut, then you start wondering just what is happening in your life, and then you actually land up getting depressed because of that. We do say that social media is here to stay, but again, one of the very, very important things that we are talking about is sexual predators, which unfortunately are very much seen in today's generation. It is incumbent on us to be aware of the fact that what you say and what you do might be misused against you, and if you're not absolutely certain about the person who you're befriending or who you're accepting as a friend, you need to take a second look, especially if there is something that seems to be going awry. And even if there's the slightest possibility that the person is not who he says he is or she says she is, let's not get into a situation which could be a cause of concern afterwards. Okay, so I'm going to give a message to the youth. We have a huge young population and you are our pride and joy, and we are looking forward for that India should become a wonderful superpower, which is possible only if you are healthy, both physically and mentally. I have seen the enormous amount of positivity in youth. I have seen the way you have reacted towards the repealing of Section 377, for example, the thing for homosexuality being a crime. And I'm so thrilled with the positivity that I see in so many of you. It would be a crime for all of us, adults, if our kids felt that the only way they could cope with life is actually to kill themselves. So don't kill yourselves. Go ahead, seek help. We all love you. We are not as bad as we make ourselves out to be. We don't have horns and we don't have a bad tail. We're not going to zap you or dope you or do anything of the sort. Please come to us for help, and I think life will be better if you do so.
I'm sure all of that information was really, really helpful. Now, we've been talking about mental health quite a bit. We've made a video on stress, on heartbreak, and even had an episode of the special ones with Dr. Chawda. We had promised to set up a counseling helpline for you, and we have done just that. We have professional psychologists who will be here to help you. We assure complete anonymity, and it's online. So you can access it from wherever you are just by sending us an email on the email ID that we have provided in the link below. Please do take advantage of this, especially working adults facing stress day in and day out, new moms, medical residents, and even school and college kids that need help. Remember, we are here to help you. Stay safe, stay healthy.